days.
So this is 2054, and we are asking Riot for a world revamp, right? And this is when they announced the Watchers are waking up. And by the way, we are talking about full dive VR technology at this point, right? So this is when we want to go from VR technology to the Soul Translator, right? So this is what happens then. A lot of people have wanted me to watch this, especially ever since we found out that Riot is making everything in the game canon. If you missed that, basically they have a bunch of like alternate universes and stuff, and they have a bunch of different stories. They're making everything canon, meaning that everything we see in this video is going to be relatively canon. Maybe not entirely canon, like it doesn't exist in the game, but theoretically it exists in the game. Let's get into the video. Let's see what Nakrit has to say. Bosses and raids of the Riot MMO.
Well,
there he is.
Hello there. It seems like people really enjoy it when I talk about things covered in deep layers of copium. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think we're riding on copium that much. So far, I have not made up a single thing, I am simply presenting things that already exist. And as my videos got traction, I started getting some valuable feedback. So before we begin today's video, let's have a look at some of the things you just had to point out. For those of you who believe—
This, by the way, this is the average, well, actually YouTube comment section. This is like a single person and their comment right here. I love SA Andy so much.
If we are starting unhealthy hype, it's fine. As long as we all understand that we are dealing with hypotheticals, and that we will all be bold by the time it comes out. I also got to interview the person who wrote the upcoming massive League of Legends novel, who was confirmed to now be working on the MMO.
Oh, look at that sword. That's such a cool sword. Look at that. Damn.
And he told me that, yes, my videos are being passed among the developers, so you can stop tagging them on Twitter now. Also, that novel is insanely good. It's Game of Thrones in League of Legends. I am
Hey, yo. Is there an audiobook version?
Excited for the potential lore of the MMO. Next, yeah, I am wearing my slippers out of my own volition. Yes, shamans can shapeshift in this universe, just like druids. And yes, Riot confirmed that Legends of Runeterra, which is the card game based on League of Legends, is a big inspiration when it comes to the world building. In case you're wondering what this is about—
Yeah, so this is what we learned recently as well, that like everything in the League universe is now canon. So they're basically homogenizing all of the lore. Everything that happens in any of these games, you should keep in mind when thinking about the MMO.
All the art I am showing—
We talked about this in Elden Ring before. This is the shield type of fantasy I can get behind. I always say shields are boring as hell, but when you have a bunch of dudes with tower shields and like their swords poking out, imagine like a legion of demons rushing at them and just throwing themselves onto the shields and swords. This is the only time when shields are badass. Other than that, shields are the most boring thing in fantasy.
You comes from Legends of Runeterra.
Just a side note.
A game that secretly acts—
This here is me.
—as a massive archive of art that reveals this universe. Anyway, after covering the world and all the races and classes the lore supports, we can now dive—
Oh my god, I'm actually going down the right watch order. Look at this.
—potential endgame bosses of this MMO. Now I know what you're thinking. This game isn't even in the playtesting phase. How can we talk about the raids? Well, you see, that's because Riot was probably thinking ahead of time, and they started a bit of a meme in the lore community. They gave this universe way too many world-ending threats. The downside of this is that, yeah, there was a time when we didn't know which world-ending threat was the real world-ending threat.
But I kind of like this, right? I talk about this a little bit in tomorrow's video on the main channel as well, but I really like the fantasy of there being like these, well, I feel like with Riot's MMO, it's going to be like actual threats, right? Whereas in a lot of like high fantasy, there are a lot of things in the world that are just like, they exist, they are threats, but you don't understand them, right? There is like a war of higher forces behind the scenes that sort of exists in the real world, but also doesn't. They are threats, but you don't know they are, right? So even though it is a bit of a meme that like the world is facing 13 different threats from like 13 different dimensions, I like the fantasy of that if it's done well and not actually explored. I'm very, very weird about these things, right? To use like a I use this example there as well, but to use like a Game of Thrones example, like the Lord of Light, he exists, you know he exists, you don't know what he is. And it's just that sort of vibe, you know? You don't know really the grasp they have on the real world and stuff like that. And if you have multiple of these, you know there might be like a conflict of faith or something like that, but you don't know it. I like that fantasy.
It was a battle between who's the biggest evil.
Yes.
But the benefits are obvious. You have a lot of meaningful enemies that you can remove before...
It's like in the lore, you hear that 13,000 years ago, there was like this big demon worm that was fighting this big dude with a big axe, and they fought for like 3 months. And then they like divided the world in two, and now one like, I don't know, controls the west and one the east. Stuff like that, right? It's like these small bits of lore you get, but you don't know anything about them. I like that.
You start limiting your storytelling. And in fact, many of these big storylines are written with all the back doors open, so that in the future they can utilize them for an event in League of Legends, or it is stories that were left open purposefully for the MMO.
Which, by the way, another side note, right? Another side note. In World of Warcraft, there's also like the meme of there being a lot of world-ending threats, but the problem with World of Warcraft's world-ending threats is that a lot of them are like super straightforward. Like, we need to defeat them, and that's it. You know, very rarely do you have world-ending threats interacting with another world-ending threat. And I feel like that is what makes the world really come alive and not feel like a story. You can have like two very, very bad dudes, and they can fight amongst each other without us having to go and kill one and then the other, you know? So I want to see how League of Legends handles that.
And that's what this video is going to be about.
Let's see.
Originally, I wanted to show you 10 storylines that were left open and which would lead into raids. But if you look at the length of this video, yeah, I cut it down to only 7. So without further ado, let's get on it. Since we are essentially talking about the world of League of Legends, especially if you have seen our last 2 MMO videos, it goes without saying that this world has material for hundreds of instances. This means that it's really up to Riot to cherry pick which ones they want to do. And since in this video I am only going to mention 7 of these, it is highly likely I am not going to mention the one that you would like to see. But if you feel strong about your own idea about a dungeon, feel free to comment about it below. This is all valuable feedback for the developers after all. Anyway, the 7 raids I picked are based on one simple fact. Their stories and setting are perfectly fit for a raid environment. Be it because their stories are set up for a grand finale, or because some of these villains already have a cast of supporting bosses.
What the hell is this?
Or simply because the battles would be really cool. And because showing is better than telling,
oh my god, it's Ice Crown Citadel.
Let's start with the first raid. One with such a good setup, the raid essentially writes itself. The Ascension of Mount Dargon.
Oh my god, I think I remember this.
Remember, Mount Dargon was created by the Celestial Gods to serve as a gateway to the Celestial Realms. And people decide to climb this place for a variety of reasons. Even though only about 1 in 10,000 makes it to the peak, some people try to climb the mountain because they...
This is another one of those things that immediately raises red flags in my, like I mentioned, higher forces brain. If 1 in 10,000 only make it to the peak, why will a raid group make it to the peak? Statistically, how does that work? I kind of want these things to be left ambiguous.
They want to be deemed worthy and
We'll
become a celestial demigod, while, for example, the Massians send their criminals here to die trying to climb the mountain. This death sentence is called the Crown of Stone. And yes, of course, you can't really force the criminals to climb the mountain unless you go there with them. So most criminals just flee and start a new life elsewhere. Also, at the peak of the mountain, we can find Aurelian Soul, the Star Forger.
Which, by the way, I mentioned this guy before, that he has, like, the galaxy forming around him, and apparently that's what it is. He is literally, like, the creator of the material plane or something ridiculous.
The reason why he is here is because of the crown he is wearing. Long story short, thousands of years ago, when people noticed that Aurelian was crossing the stars...
Remember how I likened, in one of the previous videos I also said this? I love that in League of Legends we also have the thing that we have in World of Warcraft, right? Where a lot of lore characters haven't appeared since, like, Expansion 1, or maybe even, like, Warcraft 2. So the only model we have is from like Warcraft 2. So you're going through these high fidelity models through this like very cool concept art, and suddenly you have like a model from 1999, and it's like, oh, all right. This is like, you go from this to this, it's like, oh.
They started worshipping him, which boosted Aurelian's ego. And they crafted him a crown of Celestial Star Metal. Aurelian, already being quite egoistic, donned the crown, only to realize it was a mind-controlling device. In reality, it was the Celestial Aspects who wanted to hold Aurelian's power the entire time. Now, to be fair, the Aspects are using Aurelian's powers for good cause. They are using his Celestial Fire to purge the void from Runeterra. But still, it is the Celestial Aspects.
So the Celestial Aspects are like the Titans, and the Void is like old gods in Warcraft, right?
Who enslaved Aurelian. Anyway, Riot can make up a billion reasons why we should raid this place. Though I doubt we would be able to fight Aurelian's soul at the very peak. You know, he is made out of space. But maybe we need to reach the peak to borrow some of his powers. Or
yeah,
maybe
stuff like this would be really, really cool, right? So that we don't really fight any of these beings. Like, I feel like that creates scope creep, right? Like, if you defeat this dragon that is literally, like, the creator of something, and he can, like, control stars and whatnot, where do you go after that? You know? I've always thought that these MMOs need to sort of make you an adventurer and a nobody. I don't really like being a hero in an MMO. I don't like that.
We need to kill a rampant aspect. Or maybe we just need to reach the Celestial Realm for another reason. Simply said, it is easy to make up a reason for this raid to exist.
We can even go up there and just get, like, the literal shit kicked out of us and just thrown down the mountain. And that's it. That's the raid. Like, you sort of fought through it. Like, because a raid doesn't necessarily need to end with you winning. You just need to get loot. You know? Like, if the actual encounter ends with you being kicked down the mountain, and you still get a little bit of loot, that's fine. Arthas style, but this time we lose? Exactly. I think World of Warcraft specifically really, really lacks moments where you actually lose. Like, the only times where you have those is in, like, in a quest. You know, you're doing, like, this boring quest of, like, I don't know, killing 13 minions, and suddenly the big bad spins around, wah ha 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 ha, and then you're stunned for 10 seconds, he goes on a monologue, then disappears. Why can't we have that in a raid instance? I would like that.
What's more interesting is the setting of this raid. At different levels, the mountain presents you with different enemies. So let's start with what would happen once you enter the raid.
Yeah, the concept of this is really cool.
You start at the bottom of the mountain, where you are very likely to meet Chip. Chip is an already established character who shows newcomers the wonders of the mountain. So you follow him around until we arrive at our first boss, the living mountain itself. This place has plenty of earth elementals who came alive due to the mountain's magic. Now, as I say this, don't confuse the earth elementals with Malphite. Malphite comes from Ishtal, which is quite far away from Targon. Also, he's a good guy, we don't want to fight him.
Oh.
But from the earth elementals who will likely protect this place. We have, for example, the Blue Sentinel, who also appears in League of Legends. But the biggest of them all is the Stonebreaker.
Oh, we saw
this one would be an excellent introductory boss. You know, you're fighting the mountain itself.
How in the bloody hell do you fight this? Like, I'm going to use a sword. How do I hit this thing? Do I just club away at its little legs?
And yes, I know he's a bit too big, but you can shrink him.
I'm just gonna be fighting a skybox.
For gameplay purposes. WoW has been notoriously known for inconsistent boss sizes, and it's fine. Anyway, after Stonebreaker, we go further up the mountain. And suddenly, we start meeting all the lesser dragons and their worshippers. The coolest of these are the white flame
Another
dragons.
thing, like, right? We just talked about reaching the peak. What if the raid isn't actually about reaching the peak, but rather about, like, one of these lesser dragons causing trouble and perhaps upsetting the balance? You know? We might not even have to go to the peak. We might not even have to dabble in these celestial forces. Just kill some dragons.
There is also an important dragon who serves as a beacon to the other dragons, called Inviolus Vox.
Yeah.
But the one that could likely become a boss would be the Eclipse Dragon. That's because this dragon is quite precious to the natives on the mountain, which would be boss number 3. You see, further up the mountain we start encountering the tribes. There are the Lunari who hide in the shadows because they are being suppressed and they are relatively friendly, just like the
Relatively
Nakor.
friendly.
But the Solari are fanatics who blindly protect the celestial realms at any cost. Even in the
I like that. I like that. That creates so much story potential immediately.
cinematic, you can see how they are protecting the gateway that is leading to the peak of the mountain.
Yeah.
And even though it would be cool if Riot allowed us to fight Leona herself, champions in League of Legends tend to wear pretty thick plot armor. So instead,
And that, by the way, I think in a setting like this is fine. I think characters like this, who like exist as these heads of certain like factions, I think they can keep living. And that's what I mean by like not really messing with the world itself too much, because you need to set this up as a very, very long running thing, right? So that's why I mean we don't want to take like a Galaxy Dragon as the first raid of the game. Because at that point, what do you do after that? Like you fought a Galaxy Dragon. So in that sense, I think it would kind of be cool if like encounters aren't really against her, but rather the forces of them, you know? That'd be cool. I don't
it
know.
would be cool if we could fight one of Leona's champions.
Yeah.
The one known as Daylight Spear, Ravoon. Anyway, after defeating the Solari protecting the gateway, we would get near the peak. The first one to meet us here would be the Infinite Mind Splitter. This is a legendary draconic creature with a very unique ability.
Just let us fight Leona and Diana saves us because we suck. I don't know who Diana is, but 100%. 100% just make us lose. Make someone save us. Yes. I want there to be moments where another character, another NPC is just like, what the hell are you doing? Just stop doing this. Let me jump in and make sure that you don't die, you know? I want us to be on the same level and below other dudes.
It is told that its gaze gives
the moon
you
girl,
so
okay.
much knowledge and insight that your mind crumbles beneath it. So fighting this boss would be all about getting buffs from it, while being careful not to get too many buffs, because it would kill you. And then, after getting past the...
Another example, just thought of this. I keep saying I don't want to, like, vanquish these higher beings. Diablo is a very, very good example. Because in the world of Diablo, all the demons are reborn, right? You can kill them, but they'll come back. And I feel like that is a great way of keeping it in check, right? The threat of Diablo is never gone, because he will return eventually. And that's what I mean by not really messing with the world itself. If these forces, we can like kill them, but eventually they'll come back, then I find that very, very cool. Maybe they return in a different form, and that's how the world evolves, right? Like we kill this dragon, and he comes back and is slightly different, and his personality is changed, and now he does different things, which evolves the world as a whole. That way, maybe.
Infinite Mind Splitter, we would arrive at the last stand of the mountain, the Arbiter of the Peak.
Oh my god! Is Mithrix inspired by this? Mithrix and Risk of Rain? This is straight up Mithrix. Let me bring up a picture of Mithrix. That's basically the same dude. Maybe. Play Risk of Rain. Very, very good game.
Guardian standing in the center
His
of
little
the
brother?
peak, separating mortals from the celestial realms. This is the creature that leads the mortals who survive the climb directly to the celestials. In fact, that's what you can see here. He is guiding Tiari the Traveler to the celestial realms, where they would become the Traveler. But also, in case of emergency, the Arbiter serves as a guardian against unwanted visitors.
This, honestly, feels like a Shadowlands situation, and that scares me. I don't want to mess with this guy, because that removes the mystique of the Celestials to me.
What could happen here? Either we fight the Arbiter to get its approval to pass into the celestial heavens. In this case, perhaps the Arbiter can test us with the lesser celestial beings. Or we simply have to destroy the Arbiter. In this case, the Arbiter would probably fight us with the golems. And finally, perhaps after beating the Arbiter, we are granted access to the celestial realms. And while again I doubt we would be able to fight Aurelian Soul, perhaps we could fight one of his creations that is endangering the world. We have two of them that stand out. The first creation is simply known as the Great Beyond. Aurelian Sol himself calls it his magnum opus. This is essentially a smaller celestial dragon created in Aurelian's image. So this would be like fighting Aurelian himself, except this would make sense. The one I believe might be a bit more appreciated, however, would be the one known as the Scourge.
That looks
This
so
is also
badass.
a celestial being created by Aurelian himself, but League of Legends players might recognize this one as the pure celestial version of Baron Nashor. It is believed that the physical Baron was born out of the pure...
Like, this is what I mean, right? In terms of progression, we'll see what happens later in the video, because obviously I don't know the wider universe of the game. But I want to fight dudes like this, and not dudes like this. A dude like this is something that feels too powerful. A dude like this feels like a raid boss. And I want to be very careful with these things.
Image. So, the Scourge being the final boss would be a really cool nod towards the League of Legends community. See what I mean? I just made up a 7-boss raid in a heartbeat. And I skipped a lot of details just so this video wouldn't be too long. There are the Celestial Beasts, the Demons trying to consume the heavens, the Dragon Roost near the peak where dragons are born, the Star Hounds, Esmus, the Breath of the World,
Okay.
and so on.
I'm starting to realize I don't think I just grasped like the sheer size of how many threats there are. You know, because I'm always worried about running out of threats, right? We're only 11 minutes into the video. I've been talking about this for 20 minutes already. My worry with all of this is dispelling the illusion. I don't want to wipe out world-ending threats very fast. Maybe there are more of them than I thought.
Designing this raid was simple because the lore and the setup is already there. Once again, I did not make anything up. All of this already exists in the universe. And Runeterra has a lot more places just like this one. So, let's have a look at raid number 2. The one raid I know as a fact people would love to see is a Darkin raid. You can pull this off in a lot of different ways.
Looks like demons sign me up.
The roots of the Darkin lore are in Shurima. The raid would most likely be in the deserts. Super quickly, in case you forgot, the Shuriman Empire rose to power after it started using the Sun Disk to reflect celestial magic into their soldiers, and turning them into the god warriors known as the Ascended. The Ascended were guaranteed immortality, however their minds were as fragile as they were before. After these Ascended fought the maddening Void Beasts released by their neighbors...
This is what I mean. This is what I mean in terms of establishing these threats, right? We just hear that they fought like a void being, and you're just like, oh. Oh. Okay. I don't want to mess with that.
Started going a little bit mad. But their minds finally snapped when their emperor died too, and there was no one to give them directions. The story goes that a Darkin known as Zolani, who used to be a great healer, invented blood magic and used it to heal the other Darkin, by which she also infused them with the blood magic.
Is this the dude that was too angry to die and came back to life? I think this is the dude.
Plan to use the blood magic later to control them all. This was Zolani's secret plan to stop the rampaging Darkin. Unfortunately, the Celestials noticed that the Darkin were very dangerous, and they started sealing them inside special weapons. The sad part is, Zolani herself was also sealed inside her blades.
That's
so
more
since Zolani was sealed away, there was nobody to control the others. And as a nice bonus, the remaining Darkin were now empowered with blood magic. Fortunately, in the end, the Celestials sealed all the remaining Darkin inside their weapons too. But stupidly enough, the Celestials let mortals...
Another fantasy thing, sealing dark powers into weapons is chef's kiss in terms of fantasy. Man, do I love that. That's what I think the Soul Stones in Diablo is like one of the greatest things in fantasy. I love it. The concept of sealing away this great power that someone can just stumble upon is so much story potential. I love it.
Safeguard these Darkin weapons. So of course, some people were tempted to pick up the weapons and use them for their wars. At which point, the Darkin immediately dominated the minds and bodies of those who picked them up.
I love
So
this.
yes,
This is Diablo 1's ending. Diablo 1, you defeat Diablo, the dude transforms, you grab the stone, you shove it in your forehead, and you are now Diablo. I love that so much.
rampaging god warriors managed to free themselves. So now, let's quickly go through those who would serve as big raid bosses. Perhaps the most famous one, and as far as we know, the most powerful one, is...
There is, by the way, a Darkin that is a dog, because the dog took the weapon. That sounds so badass. I love that. I love just there being like these corrupted beings that accidentally stumbled onto a weapon, or the weapon stumbled onto them. That is so cool.
Aatrox. After Aatrox was sealed away, his blade was picked up by a random warrior in the north. Of course, Aatrox immediately...
A random warrior in the north. That's like the most typical fantasy setup to a villain. I love it.
dominated the warrior's body, and since then he's been using blood magic to drain the dead around him.
Is this the Arthas dude? Please tell me this is the Arthas dude.
Make himself bigger.
Oh no,
That's what
no.
This
is the same dude. Okay.
He starts small but gets bigger the more things he kills. In fact, it got to such a point where Aatrox became the only being to ever kill a celestial god. As I mentioned in the last video, Aatrox stabbed someone wielding the power of the aspect of war so hard.
I can't get over the dichotomy of these models. I love this. This is the most World of Warcraft thing ever. You suddenly just snap to the low poly models.
The aspect of war was wiped from the stars. So out of all the Darkin, Aatrox is the ultimate end boss. Besides Aatrox, as mentioned, the second most important Darkin is Zolani. Now, Zolani has canonically not returned yet, but Legends of Runeterra is teasing that she might come back in the future. Also, as a fun fact, in the most recent cinematic, you can see that Talia and Kai'Sa arrive in front of the faceless statue of Zolani. Next, there is also Varus, a Darkin who was sealed inside a bow inside a well, and he got freed after 2 hunters fell into the well. So now, Varus's body is actually occupied by 3 souls.
This is straight up Diablo 2. I love this.
The 2 hunters and the Darkin. One could say he's the embodiment of 2.5 men. And there is also Kain, the one holding the...
Are we seriously going to allow Necrit to just get away with that line?
The scythe of a Darkin known as Rast. But as far as we know, Kain is pretty good at resisting Rast's power. So I doubt Rast would be free.
For sure.
Also, Kain is a League of Legends champion. So in order for Rast to come out, Kain would need to die.
So it's not happening. It's not happening.
And I don't think that's possible with all the plot armor.
Yeah.
But we are still not done yet. Next, from the lesser-known Darkin, there is also Horazi, who was sealed inside a small emblem. Naganeka of Zurita, who was sealed inside a giant ballista. As you can see, she looks a little bit like a chicken. And that's because it is believed that a chicken touched the ballista and the Darkin took over the chicken's body.
Do you see, this is perfectly written fantasy. I could ramble on about this forever, but the fact that a literal chicken touches an arbalist or whatever the hell it was called, I already forgot the proper name for it. But the fact that that works and it creates this absolute nightmare creature, that's the type of stuff that I feel like works really, really well in dark fantasy when you do it right. And that's what I mean by story potential here, right? Like some random kid, that's like the usual way to depict emotional damage, right? A random kid like playing in the forest stumbles upon this small dagger and he's like, his family is doing pretty bad or something. And you know, he picks up this dagger and it's like, ooh, shiny, I could sell this and then maybe my family will pop off. And suddenly he becomes a huge villain and you have this entire storyline. You could write so many things about this. I love this concept already.
And lastly, there is Tarosh, who was sealed inside a massive halberd.
That's
the
perfect.
reason why this Darkin raid would work is because all the Darkin have a common goal. They all hate Zolani. They see her as a betrayer who was trying to control them. So in this raid, we would likely fight the other Darkin as we are trying to get to Zolani. And after we
So we'd basically be fighting weapons. I like that.
kill her, we would face Aatrox as the final boss. Since all the Darkin Wars began with Aatrox and Zolani...
And with a thing like this, we just seal it away in the weapons again, and we just restore balance for a little bit. That's how this raid ends.
Starting a civil war. Also, it turns out that Aatrox was the general of all the other Darkin. So killing Aatrox would be the perfect end to the Darkin chapter. But let's not forget that Riot is already teasing a new Darkin. The next champion in League of Legends might be a dog that picked up a Darkin dagger. And if you're wondering why we would raid this place, first of all, the Darkin are pretty one-sided bad guys. But we could be led here by Nasus and Sivir. Nasus is an Ascended who avoided corruption, so he would be likely happy to put down
his eyes are red though. It's bad.
Brothers and sisters. And Sivir is holding the very first blade to be ever used to seal a Darkin. So once again, the lore is already there. And aesthetically, we have a good idea of what it would look like too. We would start outside around the temples of Zolani, which look creepy and corrupted. And later we delve beneath them to where the land is tainted by blood and death.
Perfect. Sign me up.
For the next raid, let's stay in Shurima. Because if there is a raid I would personally love to see, it is the raid on Narimazeth.
Perfect.
A city that is in ruins. That's because Narimazeth was the place where Shurimans tried to build the very first Sundisk. This first version failed, and instead of the Ascended, it was only producing the Bakai.
It is what it is.
Which are broken, twisted versions of the glorious Ascended. Yeah. And in the end, the entire city collapsed onto itself.
Yeah.
After that, the Shurimans tried to build the Sundisk again, but this time in the middle of the desert. But now, why would we want to raid these ruins? Well, that's because this city is being rebuilt by Xerath, the most powerful arcane mage on Runeterra, whose body was turned into pure arcane energy by the Sundisk itself. Long story, shorter. When Emperor Azir was a child, he became friends with...
Oh my god, this guy looks like a JoJo character. Look at his face, it's literally a JoJo character.
The nameless slave. And despite slaves being forbidden from having names, he called him Xerath. Throughout the years, the two became as close as brothers, studying culture and history whenever possible. Later on, despite his father hating him, Azir became his only surviving son. So unless his mother gave birth to another child, he would become the emperor anyway. Well, in secret, Xerath simply made sure she would not give birth to another child. Usually he did it by corrupting the infant in her womb, because...
Ayo.
It turns out, this entire time, Xerath was trying to break his roots from slavery. And now he had the ambition to gain power himself. So he justified these murders by telling himself that he was protecting a friend. Despite his efforts, the queen did give birth to another child. So Xerath summoned a storm and let lightning kill the queen and the child. Eventually, all these events led to Azir becoming the crowned emperor of Shurima with Xerath by his side. From this point on, Xerath was waiting for Azir to finally get rid of slavery, which never happened. Despite Azir being the most beloved emperor in history, he allowed slavery to keep going on. And that angered Xerath. At the end of the story, the Emperor was chosen to become an Ascended himself. But during the ceremony, when the sun...
So I guess this Ascended thing isn't really that big of a deal as I thought it was. Because I thought the Ascended was like, you know, basically becoming a god, I guess not.
Was focusing its power into Azir's body. Xerath was so full of his BS, he incinerated him and forced all the power of the Sundisk into himself. This resulted in Xerath's body being turned into pure arcane energy, the death of Azir, and the collapse of the Sundisk and the destruction of the entire empire. You wanna know the twist at the end? If you read the story from Azir's perspective, you learn that he did want to remove slavery. He just wanted it to be a surprise. In fact,
a little bit of dabbling, a little bit of surprise. That's so messed up. What the hell?
he even announced it just as Zerath betrayed him. But Zerath already murdered way too many people, so even though he really wanted to stop, it was too late to go back. So Zerath doomed the entire empire. And yes, because the emperor died, Zerath is also technically the reason why the Darkin exist. I already mumbled about the lore for way too long, so just know this. Nasus's brother, Renekton, bound Zerath in a sarcophagus, and he locked himself with Zerath in a tomb. Many years later, scavengers opened the tomb and released Renekton and Zerath. As I said, Zerath is
Again, stumbling onto a ancient power, the mummy. I love this.
currently in Nerimazeth, and he is actually trying to rebuild the original Sun Disk. We don't really know why he is doing it, but I think it's safe to assume that he just wants more power. But you know what it smells like to me? It smells like a big old setup for a future raid. In Legends of Runeterra, you can see Zerath with all his worshippers. You can also see all the mini-bosses around him. Especially we know about Demi Yin the Unbound. But besides all of these
Pure
heralds
energy?
and acolytes,
Why not?
this raid would also have the Bakai, the original experimental ascended who come from this city. But also we would fight Renekton himself, because it turns out after hundreds of years of being locked in a tomb with Zerath, Zerath broke his mind by whispering to him that Nasus betrayed him. He purposefully led him to rot in the darkness. That's why Renekton is quite crazy these days.
Oh.
It all goes back to Zerath, who might be the ultimate villain of Shurima.
Okay. Okay.
For the next raid, why don't we play off of the success of Arcane? No spoilers,
Season 2 coming 2024, by the way.
don't worry. Previously, when I told you about the cities Piltover and Zaun, I showed you that at the very bottom of that place you can find the ruins of an ancient Shuriman city. But that will become just a dungeon. The one that would become an interesting raid would be the Empire of Renada Glask. After I mention this, I know a lot of you will be confused. After all, Renada Glask is just a rich baron from Zaun. How can she support an entire raid? Well, in this case, it is all built on two factors. First of all, Renada is way too big of a character to be removed in just a dungeon. But more importantly, Renada Glask released this year, and she was released as yet another big villain, after all the other already established villains in Piltover and Zaun. She simply really feels like a setup for something in the future. Because after already having Singed and Urgot and Victor as villains in Zaun, Riot didn't need to make up another. It
So is there like a rival gang story type of going on?
feels obvious they released Renada to be a villain supervising the other bad guys of Zaun. Before her, Zaun didn't really have a main villain. So obviously she is now filling that role.
Have you seen
Her
Arcane?
lore is
I have, but once, and I've forgotten most of it. I need to rewatch it, absolutely.
making her the main boss of Zaun. Her raid would be very clear in its structure. We would follow the detective case of Caitlyn and Vi as we try to find her hideout. Perhaps Camille, an extremely dangerous assassin from Piltover, would be also interested in killing her. From that point on, we would literally raid her place with the Wardens. As a nice bonus, people would love to see the popular champions Zeri and Echo on our side, both of which are kids from the streets who have destroyed her warehouses before. But the last puzzle piece is, why would we raid Renada? Well, the Glask family owns Glask Industries, which is the most luxurious brand in Piltover and Zaun. They sell perfumes and really fancy limb replacements. And
Nice.
unfortunately, this brand reflects a bit of real life, since these fancy formulas are developed down in Zaun, using slave labor. But there is also a
Oh.
darker twist. All their products are infused with a chemical formula, which can turn their customers into mindless rampaging husks at any moment. It's kinda like,
So she basically has a sleeper agent army that is also made with slave labor. Sounds pretty bad, yeah. Yeah, sounds pretty bad. Sounds kind of bad.
Apple. Now, since Renata is a recent champion, that's all her story really has. She is probably the most powerful Baron in Zone, who can make an entire city fall into chaos with the press of a button. And now we're just waiting to see
She's got that
when
Zeke energy.
she would unleash it. If you ask me, I normally wouldn't think that this would be a great raid, but this would be very different from raiding dragons, which would actually give it the benefit of changing environment. But also remember, this is riding off of Arcane's fame, and I doubt Riot would pass on that opportunity. That's why I feel confident we will meet Renata in the MMO.
Okay, okay.
And now we are diving into the top 3 raids. I am extremely confident that some form of these will be in the MMO. That's for 2 reasons.
Look at this dude, look at how badass he looks. Look at him, look at him. It's just red eyes under a hood. Sign me up.
First of all, these big villains are way too big to be ignored. We are talking about characters in the style of Arthas Menethil.
Okay, listen up. I need to sit up in my chair. Let me get comfortable. Let's pop off.
But also, their lore turns them into world-threatening enemies that have to be dealt with the first of these being Viego, the Ruined
So it's just Arthur.
King. There is not a sliver of a doubt we will see the Ruined King in the MMO.
I've said this before. This is Arthas if World of Warcraft was an anime.
You can point a gun to my head, tell me to guess a villain in this MMO, and I will smile knowing that I survived. It would be unimaginable to ignore him. Now, the issue lying in front of me right now...
He's like a weird blend of Virgil, Dante, and Arthas. And I like that. You know? He's got that Dante vibe going on, but he's got the Arthas look. I don't know.
That Viego's story is massive.
His sword is badass though.
On top of the normal story he has in League of Legends, he got his own book that is 400 pages long, the entire RPG game called Ruined King, which is focusing on his reawakening, and League of Legends got its own in-game event that was focusing...
Which Virgil? Devil May Cry.
...on pushing his lore forward, which
Virgil,
also included
I don't know
3 cinematics. Right now, Viego has the most lore out of
is there an audiobook version of the book? Because if there is, then I'll listen to it.
any champion in this universe. So let me summarize it as quickly as possible.
Okay.
Viego was a Camavoran prince who was forced into becoming the king at an early age.
Okay.
Because
I know
of
this.
He was not ready to become a king, and many would not consider him a really good king. Still being a teenager, he often threw tantrums in the style of Kylo Ren.
Okay.
To keep the kingdom from crumbling, he relied on his 2 advisors, Callista and Nuno Necrit of Camavor. Yes, that's the character named after me. Eventually, Viego met the love of his life, Isolde, a woman whom he loved very, 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 very deeply. He loved her so much that he would do anything for her. But she didn't abuse it. Isolde was actually a very good queen. For the majority of Viego's ruling, he waved the kingdom's problems away just so he could be with Isolde. Until the day someone tried to poison Viego to finally remove him from the throne, and instead they poisoned Isolde. This is where Viego's dark side really started to show. After trying absolutely everything imaginable, nobody was able to heal his queen. And Viego's angry depression started taking over him. After weeks of desperate searching, Viego found out that there may exist a hidden place called the Blessed Isles.
I see where this is going. I see where this is going. I like this.
And so he sent Callista away to find the Isles. After a long adventure, Callista succeeded and she confirmed that the Blessed Waters did indeed exist. So on the next trip, Callista brought the Queen and the King and their soldiers with them, so that they could all heal the Queen and be happy ever after. But of course, there was a dark twist. The Queen died before they arrived on the Isles.
Perfect.
And the priests...
This is the type of emotional damage I am all here for. You set up this thing as a big goal and then you take it away. People will call it like a unsatisfying ending. You set up this whole plot device that doesn't go anywhere. That's the point. You cut it short and you have this emotional damage. Yes. Perfect. I like the story already.
Confirmed that they can heal anything.
Please tell me, please spoil me on this. He might talk about this. Does his kingdom also fall apart without him? Because if he loses his wife, then he goes mad and his kingdom falls apart. That's like the 1-2 punch. I like it.
As long as the person is alive. But that didn't stop Viego from trying. So after the priests denied him entrance to the waters, Viego massacred everyone who stood in his way, and following a creepy warden called Thresh, he arrived at the waters and dunked the queen in. For a moment, the waters did resurrect the queen, but then she was turned into a wraith, who killed Viego with his own blade, which caused his soul to be absorbed by the blade. I'm skipping a lot of details here, so just know that yes...
I'm gonna read this book. This book sounds really, really good. Like, really, really good.
The blade can absorb souls. We'll actually talk about the blade in the next MMO video, whenever that one comes out. Anyway, after Viego was killed with his own blade, everything exploded in necromantic magic. His queen's soul was shattered into fragments, and the entire place was turned into the Shadow Isles. For 1,000 years, Viego's soul stayed there in the blade. Until the Pirate King Gangplank was told by Thresh that he could totally...
This is like everything I want, right? You have this depressing narrative of this dude just trying to save his wife. He loses everything. He's killed by a wraith. His soul is absorbed into a weapon that a random dude later finds. And please tell me that the rest of his story is trying to like reassemble her soul that was shattered everywhere.
Pick up the blade. His mind was totally strong enough to resist the power of the king. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. And the moment Gangplank picked up the blade, his mind and body was dominated by Viego, who then used that body to fully release himself back into the world. After that, even though everyone's been dead for 1,000 years, Viego still wanted to bring his wife back. And so he started to unleash the undead with the Black Mist all around the world, in an attempt to find all the fragments of his queen's soul.
Almost as if that is a great story.
Eventually, he succeeded, and he actually managed to bring the queen...
He brings her back, and he realizes that, wait, it's still not her. I can't fix her, and that's when he goes even more mad, and he's just like, you know what? If everything's going down, I'm gonna burn down the whole world with it.
...soul back. But immediately after that, he was defeated by the Sentinels of Light.
Oh, never mind.
Remember the undead hunting class from the last video?
I thought that's when he goes like even more over the top, because he's like, well, if I can't even have you, then well, you know, no one can have anything, and then I'll just burn it all down.
It's them. And not only did they permanently destroy the queen's soul, because the queen didn't actually want to be resurrected, but Viego's entire story arc ended with him being teleported back to his homeland called Kamavor, where he was banished until the present days. You can actually see the end of the storyline in the cinematic called Absolution. And this is why Viego is going to be an incredible boss in the MMO. He does have a lot of story behind him, but more importantly, this entire time we have only seen his young, reckless personality, where he acts like a child throwing tantrums.
Yeah, and now he doesn't have anything to lose, right? Oh damn, this is real good.
As he's constantly trying to help someone he is obsessively in love with, but the thing is, his entire life he was chasing his queen. He was ready to go beyond death just to be with her. But now he was imprisoned after learning that the queen didn't want to be with him, but also after her soul was permanently destroyed.
My guy has nothing.
Once Viego is unleashed from his prison again, instead of a...
You know how I just said that like the soul shatters and now he's going to wipe out the entire world? I got a little bit ahead of myself. That's what he does now when he is unleashed. Spoilers for the expansion.
We are going to have a pissed off king who has nothing to lose.
Yes.
And that transformation into the Dark King is something I really wanna see. And you can only imagine what the raid is gonna look like. Hordes of risen Kamavoran soldiers, ancient undead dragons brought from his homeland, the legendary Rasa the Sunderer, and even more legendary Hex.
I'm calling it right now. I haven't even played the game. This will be my favorite expansion. I don't even care how the gameplay is. I don't even care what the systems are. I don't care about anything. I see this. Sign me up.
Of the Iron Order. But there is also Commander Ledros. Or
looks so
maybe
cool.
Karthus, the Death Singer. And finally Thresh, the one who caused all of this to happen. The hidden master of puppets in the shadows. Simply said, Viego has a lot of meaningful enemies serving him. And the raid will be glorious.
Goddamn.
Side note, in the distant future, I kinda wanna cover the entire story of Viego. Wish me luck.
I'm just gonna
For
read
the
the book
next
and then
raid,
I'll watch the
we are
video.
not delving too far away from the undead theme. Because it's time to cover the most brutal badass warrior this universe had
Okay, we're just going banger after banger.
ever seen. Super quickly, just for clarity. Viego's deathly magic is really undeath in its true meaning.
He's
When
just
he's
Arthas.
turning his enemies into undead souls, it's more like he is preventing them from dying. And he's turning them into somewhat living wraiths instead.
Yeah.
So he's not really the master of death. As you'll see, that title goes to Mordekaiser. His story begins as a warlord known as Sun Uzal.
Okay.
During his time, the main continents were occupied by barbaric tribes. Sun Uzal believed that by killing as many people as possible, he would please the gods of the afterlife.
Of course.
And so, he forged an empire in blood and death.
Of
As
course.
his life was near the end, he took great satisfaction in
Is it like the point to max out your KD ratio?
knowing that he would sit at the gods' tables in the glorious halls of bones. However, when he died,
So is that like this version of Valhalla? The halls of bones?
he found no glory waiting for him. Instead, Sun Uzal stood in an empty grey wasteland, with an occasional soul drifting by. He watched as these lesser spirits faded into the fog, unmade and lost in time. But Sun Uzal refused to fade. His will, tempered by rage and torment, held him together. In other words, he was simply too angry to die. He started listening to the disembodied whispers around him, and he learned this was Oknun, the language of the dead. Slowly, he came up with a plan. He began whispering temptations into the veil between realms, promising power to any who would listen.
I like this is the perfect thing for like a shit post, you know? Like POV, you murder thousands of people to become like the next god. Realize there actually is nothing. Then you get so angry that you're just like, you know what? I'm gonna go back and now I'm gonna fix it all. It's so dumb. I love it.
And sure enough, he managed to tempt a few cultists into bringing him back to life. Lacking any flesh or bone, he told the cultists to bind his spirit to metal plates.
Just bring me back. I'll do it again. I'll do it better. I'll fix it up. It's fine.
Forged in the likeliness of his old armor. And so he rose as the Revenant of Iron and Hate. No longer called Sun Uzal, but rather, in Oknun, he was Mordekaiser. Originally, these cultists wanted to use Mordekaiser as a weapon in their trivial wars. But instead, Mordekaiser killed them all, and he used their souls to forge himself a brutal mace called Nightfall.
It is what it is.
With that, Mordekaiser's second conquest of the world started.
Oh.
But this time, he was wielding necromantic magic. All his enemies were confused because it seemed like Mordekaiser only cared about massacre and destruction. Entire generations perished under his campaign. But in reality, there was far more to Mordekaiser's real plan. At the center of his empire, he raised the Immortal Bastion, which became the largest structure on Runeterra. And he used that place to gather information about spirits and death. be it by
Mordekaiser in German means something like murder emperor? Sounds about right.
capturing and studying demons, or torturing Yordles until he could harvest their secrets. He did everything in his power to understand the realms beyond.
So
Eventually,
he is basically what the jailer in World of Warcraft should have been. Like a dude that has seen the dead, and he's like, wait, hold up. I need to go back. There's something I still need to do. But they didn't.
Mordekaiser became such a tyrant the entire continent banded against him. But when he was ultimately defeated, it was not because of his enemies, but rather he was betrayed from his inner circle. The Immortal Bastion had a secret cabal led by a witch we know as LeBlanc. They managed to separate Mordekaiser's spirit from his armor and seal the empty armor in a hidden place. As a result, without his physical vessel, Mordekaiser was forced out of the physical realm. What none of the cultists knew, however, is that all of this was according to Mordekaiser's plan.
Okay, so he is the
entire
jailer.
time he was forging a destiny greater than the halls of bones. When he finally returned to the empty wasteland of the afterlife, he was met by the hundreds of thousands who died under his reign.
So it was literally what I said. Dude was like, bring me back. I'll do it again.
Prevented by his dark magic, they would never fade. They would be his eternal army bound to his will. But even the weakest of the spirits were given purpose. Just like he used the souls of the cultists to forge his maze, the weakest of the souls would become the building blocks of his afterworld.
This is so bad. Like,
so
this is,
Mordecai-
like, I joke about it, but this is unironically what the jailer should have been. This is such an infinitely more interesting narrative than the jailer was in World of Warcraft. This is so good. This is like a dude straight up, like, creates death, but he realizes there is nothing in death, so he's like, bring me back, I'll do it again, and I'll actually build something in death. That is such a cool concept, right? This is like this character that has this higher understanding and does, like, impossibly bad things, but for a greater goal that we just do not understand. I like this.
Kaiser became the king of the afterlife.
Yeah.
And even though he was cast out, with his physical vessel being banished in the Immortal Bastion in Noxus, he is already planning on how to return. And once he does so, after so many people were fed into his realm...
There are 100% there are people building theories that he's actually not a bad guy. Like 100%, there are people who really embrace the ambiguity, and it's like maybe rebuilding this whole thing in death, even though everyone is supposedly bound to his will, maybe his goal is even bigger than that. Like 100% there are people theorizing about this, and that's what makes a good baddie. Like his form of understanding eclipses ours. The jailer, on the other hand, he died? Oh, there's another bigger threat. Goodbye. Now I'm going offline. And that's it. You know? Man.
He
I like
would be
this.
so powerful, nobody would know how to stop him. Since that is where his story cut off, you know that this is a setup for the future. Even in League of Legends, sometimes Mordekaiser is joked about as a raid boss. Once he starts rolling, you need the entire team to get him down.
I like this.
And Riot would be foolish not to use him as a badass raid boss in the MMO. Especially since we already know some of the other characters that we would see in his raid. When Mordekaiser was conquering the world the second time, he had two demons which he used as his companions. These would be Tybalt, the giant...
I don't think that's a demon. That's just like... I don't even know what that is.
Fire demon, and Atakan, an iron-bound shadow demon. To get to him, we would probably have to get past the one who banished him, LeBlanc, and I wouldn't be surprised if we also met Vygar, the Yordle Mordekaiser tormented to get his Yordle secrets. Finally, we would likely fight alongside Swain, one of the leaders of Noxus who is actively trying to root out the dark magics from Noxus.
Oh my god, ravens with multiple eyes. Another one of those things I love in fantasy. I love weird ravens. And I love weird crows, and ravens, and birds, and just weird birds. I love it. 6 eyes, it looks like it. Yeah, it looks like 3 on this side, 3 on the other. I love it.
So yeah, maybe Mordekaiser's story is not as long as Viego's.
Swain's kind of like Tywin Lannister? Never mind then.
But Mordekaiser is built on brutal conquest. His story is simply badass, and you bet that's what people want to fight.
Yes.
And this takes us to the last raid I want to show you. Not only is
I see snow. I see snow, I need to sit up again. Tell me more.
this raid inevitable, but it is going to be the final raid before Riot starts to get sweaty about their future. Because from that point on, they would be...
This is a sealed away old god far in the north that people, like, there is a mysterious force guarding it, and we don't even know what this force is, but they've been tasked with, like, guarding it for a very, very long time. So this is like the White Lotus guarding the Red Lotus.
Be forced into
Yeah?
making up new
Did they actually
enemies.
call it?
And that's usually when the lore of MMOs crumbles. With the ultimate end
Wait, hold on.
from that point, or Riot starts to get sweaty about their future. Because from that point on, they would be forced into making up new enemies. And that's usually when the lore of MMOs crumbles. With the ultimate...
This is what I mean. Like, where do you go after fighting the Lord of Death? Where do you go after fighting a this, by the way, if this is not a Berserk reference, I'll be very, very sad. This looks like the God Hand. Like, you defeat a celestial god, you defeat the god of death, you defeat the god of life, you defeat the god of dreams, you defeat the god of the mortal realm, you defeat all the gods, and then you're just like, well, there's a dragon. He's really strong. Can you go and kill him? It's like, wait, hold on. Hold on. Let's see what this is.
Endgame in Runeterra being the battle against the end of everything.
This is
The
Ragnarok.
Watchers of the Void.
Yeah.
Now, I know we already quickly summarized the story of the Watchers when we talked about the world. But we need to quickly do it again because if they get their own raid, it would be a really cool merging of multiple storylines of this universe. Basically, at the beginning of everything, there was nothing.
Same.
Just dark, empty void.
Just like me for
Until there was a spark of light. This spark of light illuminated the darkness and revealed creepy entities we know as the Watchers, who before this event didn't even know about their own existence. Of course, since this first light woke the Watchers up for the first time since the beginning of time, the Watchers got annoyed and they decided to
The raid
silence it
bosses.
so they could sleep again. As they drifted closer, we learned that this spark was indeed our reality. So to get rid of the light, the Watchers tried to poke it and taint it. But they were always too big to get through and deal with it themselves. So instead, they reached into reality, stole something, corrupted it, and released it back.
Yeah, so this is basically like the Void Lords, right? Like putting down old gods. I like this. I like this. There's a very good reason why this is used in so many fantasy stories. It's good. It's existential horror that you do not understand. I like this.
That it would destroy the rest of the reality. But even that wasn't too successful. Eventually, the Watchers started whispering into the light. And the Ice Witch known as Lysandra answered. The Watchers promised
These are some very, very ugly helmets. I do not approve of these helmets at all.
her people immortality and grace.
Imagine trying to walk through a freaking door frame. And you just bang your head against the entire door frame. That's a really, really bad helmet.
Power.
Get rid of it.
In exchange, they asked Lysandra to prepare her world for the coming of the Void. In secret, behind the backs of her two sisters,
I actually called
she
it.
agreed. The Watchers empowered the strongest of their followers and turned them into the Iceborn. And soon enough, the Watchers broke into reality in the Freljord. With it,
Is there like an actual army guarding these things? Like we stumble to the north and there's this mysterious army guarding something and you don't know what it is? I love that.
Lysandra's allegiance with the Watchers was undeniable. But as the Watchers rose for the first time, Lysandra got to see how horrifying they were. And she realized they
so it is Lysandra's army actually guarding them. Okay. Okay, I like that. Because that's like my favorite thing about the White Lotus, right? Like in Korra we find out that they're just like tasked with guarding the Red Lotus basically. That is such a cool thing. I love there being like this ambiguous force that guards something and you don't even know what it is. It's just like we've done this for thousands of years or something like that. You know, with the Red Lotus, it's not thousands of years, but effectively it's the same thing.
Here to destroy everything. In desperation, Lysandra sacrificed her sisters and the Iceborn to use their magic to freeze the Watchers beneath the ice. But even that magic wasn't enough. Beneath the ice, the Watchers were only sleeping. They would break out should they try to wake up. So these days,
So this is 2054, and we are asking Riot for a world revamp, right? And this is when they announced the Watchers are waking up.
Lysandra is kidnapping the survivors.
And by the way, we are talking about full dive VR technology at this point, right? So this is when we want to go from VR technology to the Soul Translator, right? So this is what happens then.
Being iceborne, she freezes them in her fortress. She is then using their inherent powers to reinforce the ice, and she is feeding their dreams to the Watchers to keep them asleep. As a bonus, Lysandra is killing anyone who remembers the old days, and who could spill out that she actually kinda betrayed.
Do you think we could have full dive VR in our time? Yes, absolutely.
All humanity.
20 years ago, you didn't even have a smartphone.
See, this setup on its own is enough to support a raid. Let's say we raid the Frostguard Citadel, which is where Lysandra is keeping the Watchers frozen. First, we get there by crossing.
This is so bad. Look at it. Oh my god. It's a map in League. I'm not gonna play League of Legends, but this looks so cool.
The Holding Abyss. This is the bridge that is incredibly iconic for League of Legends players. This is where you play ARAM. I bet you never noticed that at the end of the bridge, you can actually see the entrance to the Frostguard Citadel. And in fact, the ghastly shopkeeper is one of the soldiers who remembers the coming of the Watchers. After getting inside, we would fight Lysandra's frozen thralls. These are trolls that Lysandra twisted herself to serve her. But they are also supported by the Harbinger of Thralls, whatever that is. Then we would fight through Lysandra's army of the Druklorn. These warriors dedicated their lives to Lysandra, knowing that they are protecting the world from the end of everything.
Yeah, so basically they are just secret keepers. I love it.
Next we would face the most mysterious creatures of the Freljord. We don't really know what they looked like in their pure form. We only know what they look like after they were corrupted by the Watchers. And these would be the creatures with their very interesting names. There is She Who Wanders, They Who Endure, and It That Stares.
Remember what I said about ambiguous fantasy? This is it. It's like they, it. That's so good.
Whatever these creatures used to be, now they are titanic, with their eye-beam disintegrating reality. Then of course we would have to get past Lysandra herself before we arrive at the frozen...
No. Listen, you know what happens here? This is when she's just like, listen up, buddy. Everything goes black, she freezes us. Fade to black. That's the end of the game.
Of course, we would have to get past Lysandra herself before we arrive at the Frozen Watcher. I think it's likely that we are going to fight one of these. And what's cool is that even though this is the toughest enemy this universe has to offer, even if we defeat it, we don't really defeat all the Watchers. That's the clever backdoor of this universe. We can't destroy them all. They are the primal force, there is an endless sea of them. If anything, our reality is a parasite in their void. So if we defeat a Frozen Watcher, all we really do is plug a hole. But the Watchers continue being a threat. Anyway, this Watcher looks strange, doesn't it? It's not really the floating...
It does not look strange, it looks absolutely immaculate. It looks perfect. It's so good.
Eye that you would imagine. Well, that's because, as it is with all the League of Legends stories, there is a twist.
Oh.
You see, just as the Watchers are able...
This looks mid. I don't like... This is mid. I don't like this. This, I like. This, I don't care about at all. This is boring. What the hell is this? This is a stick bug. This, badass.
To corrupt a being.
They
are also open to being corrupted themselves. The process always
comes
from both sides. And so, the more the Watchers interact with humans, for example, the more human-like they become themselves. And since the Watchers in the Freljord were frozen there for thousands of years, Legends of Runeterra shows us that once they would break through, that's what they would look like. They would have many human-like limbs, the story told us they have fur from all the animals, and they even have a creepy fake face. So no.
It like straight up looks like a mask. I love it. It's like a small mask to be like, yeah, I am like you. So this is what humans look like? Well, I will look like that as well.
What a pure watcher would look like. This is a watcher tainted by the people of the Freljord. Also, you might be wondering, how do we actually beat the most powerful being in this universe?
We don't, that's when the world revamp happens.
That's where the stories collide. First of all, Lysandra would be the key to freezing the Watchers. She would have to be on our side at the end there. Also, the primal god Ornn constructed the bridge leading to the Citadel. And this bridge was used as a magical seal to help keep the Watchers down there. So Ornn himself would help us. But most importantly, there is another massive storyline that is in Shurima, centered around a Voidborn known as Belveth. Because this video is already way too long, just super quickly. You know how the Watchers themselves got tainted when interacting with reality? Down in Shurima, a small pocket dimension formed between the Void and our reality. It was sort of like a cancer growth on the Void. In fact, if you dive deeper into this, you may realize that this is directly correlating to real-life cancer. If you don't know, cancer is just living tissue that decided, hey...
It's like death RNG, unironically. Sometimes it happens.
I don't want to die. And that's exactly what happened here. As the Void started consuming people in Shurima, it got tainted by the people and it formed self-awareness. Soon, because this cancerous growth inside the Void needed to represent itself, it grew a creature known as Belveth. A Voidborn that looks a bit fishy because she consumed a harbor, but also she doesn't actually like the Watchers because the Watchers want to end...
So, are they like so malleable because they just like, they are a Void, right? So their malleable nature just comes from the fact that they literally do not exist. So in order to take form, they're just like, yeah, that looks interesting, I'll become sort of like it. That's cool.
Everything. And all Belveth wants to do is to live. And so these days, Belveth is consuming entire cities at a time. And she is rebuilding everything with the information she got. With her ultimate end goal being to rebuild all reality. So that she could be reality, and she would be strong enough to fight the Watchers. Of course, at this time, she doesn't really have all the information gathered. So whenever she's recrafting cities and people, it all looks uncanny. However, at this point, she consumed...
I think uncanny is an understatement. What the hell is this?
Hundreds of thousands of people. And she's using all of their brain power, so Belveth is very smart. Now,
10 million IQ.
The reason why this storyline is important is because Belveth once talked to Kaisa, and she offered her...
Also, side note, I love the fish because that's like the drowned god, you know? It's like Cthulhu. I like it.
Because Belveth once talked to Kaisa, and she...
Riot cinematics are insanely good. Yeah, I know that they're like on par with Blizzard cinematics at this point. I still think, like, from what I've seen at least, like, the War Within cinematic, that is just like... I don't even know. I don't know who could replicate something like that. That was insane. But yeah, they're like really good from what I've seen.
Offered her a deal. If mortals helped Belveth consume reality faster, she would spare them to be the last she would consume. Belveth said that she did the calculations and she knows that humanity could never beat her. But at least, with this deal, she gave them the chance to create a weapon or maybe find a hero
what the hell kind of
could slay her.
What is that?
She knows they could never achieve it, but she is willing to give them the chance.
Diva from Power Rangers.
This is where we can get another twist. This wasn't confirmed, this is purely my theory, but I believe that there is a way to destroy Belveth. See, Belveth believes that we can't beat her, but the fact is, she used hundreds of thousands of human brains to figure it out. But the humans can't even comprehend the power of the Celestials.
This is like, again, going back to all the way what I said here, these forces should exist outside of our brains. They just are, and that's it. They exist, they do things, that's it. They are so far and beyond our comprehension that we don't even touch them.
So I believe Aurelian's soul could destroy her. She just doesn't have the brain power to figure that out herself. So what I think is going to happen is that...
Skill issue. Couldn't figure it out? Well, just think better, forehead.
At some point we are going to beat Belveth. She realizes she was wrong, she realizes that humanity is stronger than her when fighting the Watchers, and she decides to help us destroy them. So should we ever get a raid on the Frostguard Citadel, I wouldn't be surprised if before that we got another raid where we delve into Belveth's little pocket dimension, and with her help we move to the north. Or, you know, we just destroy her, that would be way cooler.
Yes.
So all of that is still just a wild theory. The fact is, we are fighting the Watchers. That is inevitable.
In 15 years. 25 actually, because the game comes out in 15 years.
And that was all the raids I wanted to show you. All of them are supported by the lore, and it is up to Riot whether they want to do them or not.
I'm not gonna lie, my favorite absolutely is Arthas at home.
Except the last 3 raids.
Like, his story is like a mixture of Thomas Shelby from freaking Peaky Blinders, of Arthas, of who else does he remind me of? Kinda like Dante, but not really. A bit Nero, I guess, but also not really. He's just cool.
Those are happening, there is no way around it. But because people are going to freak out, let me give you some honorable mentions. This universe also technically has the Grim Reaper. While they may have many forms, the most well-known form of death itself is Kindred. We wouldn't really have a good reason to fight them though, since death isn't really an evil entity in this universe, but, you know,
I love that.
I would
kinda
also
like
love
that.
to fight against Vladimir's Hemomancers. We could also get a raid on the Ursine, with Volibear being the final boss, the primal god of wilderness. In the east, there is
Sounds
also
cool.
the mysterious demon known as Ashlash, a 7-handed liquid demon that is locked beneath the earth, in a place known as the 7th layer. Neela
That sounds
is
pretty
currently wielding its power, and it looks like a setup for the future. Also, there
What is going on in the background? Why is there like a serpent with like, I guess those are eyes, but like that kind of looks like an eyes. There's a ship in half. Sea monsters? Oh. Oh. Wait, she is walking on water? Oh. Okay.
There is Fiddlesticks, the primal and most powerful demon on Runeterra. Fiddlesticks itself is just a puppet. The
So he kind of looks like the Butcher. He reminds me of the Butcher in
demon
Diablo.
is what you can see inside the cage. But because Fiddlesticks is roaming around the world, I couldn't really figure out
He's just a dude. It's like walking around and sometimes cleaves dudes apart. It's just what he does.
a raid setting. But you bet we are fighting him at some point. If you want a creepy
He's a scarecrow?
video to
I like
react to, find Fiddlesticks Cinematic. Simply said, the lore supports so much more than what I showed you today. And in the future, I can make
Is this to do with Arthas? Please tell me it is.
a smaller video where I cover the dungeons of
yes.
this MMO. All being theoretical, of course. But for now,
Oh my god, look at that.
that's it. I'm running out of content, so let's see, what do we have next?
But hey, my question: why do you hold the lav mic?
Wait, what do you...
Incredible. That was a really, really good video. Oh my god. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. This, if I play this, then I quit the game. Like, straight up, I play through this story. How would they do it, though? Like, because if they're just doing that, like all of this story is like a prequel, and we only deal with him being unleashed, I don't know, man. Because I feel like the story of his setup is so good. It's like it is kind of your typical thing of like, I want to save my girlfriend, right? So I'll make the world burn. It is kind of stereotypical, but damn, is it good. I like it. I want to play through this whole thing. I want to see his downfall, corruption, madness, and then his like rise again. So I don't know how that would work in terms of an MMO. Because again, this is avoiding the World of Warcraft problem, right? You don't want to tell these awesome stories where most of the story is in a book that came out 15 years ago. You know? Exactly, read the book and you'll see it all. That's what I mean, you know? a big problem with World of Warcraft is the way it tells its story. It's not really the story itself. Like, a lot of the World of Warcraft story makes sense if you absorb everything. But in the game, you play through the game and you're like, what the hell is even going on? And, that's a problem. And again, that's what I feel like the next-gen MMO must really figure out. How do you convey story in a game where people do not want to play for story? I'm not putting it as a blanket statement, but generally speaking, most people skip through quest text. They always do. That is why cinematics exist, to convey like the most important bits of the story exist purely in cinematics. Game developers talk about this all the time, right? They have like 5 minutes of cinematics. They sometimes need to tell you the entire story. So that is a big hurdle they need to overcome. But man, is this guy badass. Maybe by killing his followers, you find out about his story? Something like that, yeah. Something like that would be cool. How do you make MMO raiders care about more than just the loot? Well, there will always be like MMO raiders who just play the game for the raids. Yes, 100% yes. But it's again like not making the game around 1% of the player base. I feel like it'll be interesting what happens with the World of Warcraft delves. I'm really, really interested to see what happens with those. Because I genuinely do believe that raids are kind of on their way out. Currently. Broadly speaking. You kill his followers and get flashbacks of his life from time to time, that'd be gas. Yes! I'd love that. I'd love that. It's like slowly piecing together the story of the fallen king. Oh my god. That is so good. Anyway, I'll link this video in chat. I need to read the book. I'll look up the book, and I'll probably listen to the book, and then I'll report back. Man. Okay, another dude I actually care about is this dude. I want to find out what his goals are, right? This dude, who's like... he dies, figures out, wait, hold on. I thought this server was supposed to be the cool one, right? I did so many things in, like, the base building server, right? So I kind of want to go to this server, but there's nothing here. So bring me back, I'll do it again. I'll make it better, I'll take all of you with me, and then I'll make my own kingdom that's maybe better. I want to see what's with this dude. The rest of these things, I'm a little bit worried about, right? Like, honestly, this right here, the very first thing he covered, is kind of the thing that I'm most worried about, because it is the most out there. It feels like too powerful, you know? Like this right here, dealing with the Arbiter, who decides, like, your fate, that's too big. That's too big. Imagine they started with it at the start of the game for like 7 years until we get to see him in the game. I'd be fine with that. I want the... this is like another thing, right? In World of Warcraft, a lot of the things that are like setting up stories for way later on are hidden in like small lore books, right? What if certain threats were established kind of early on, but other things are just more urgent, right? So we deal with like a small storyline of something brewing in like the southern seas. But we're just like, oh no, something really bad is going on in the north. We need to move our armies to the north. And then that thing in the south begins to brew and brew and brew and gain even more strength. And that is the next expansion, right? It's not like a small thing hidden in a book, but we have the hindsight. We know the world building of the story. So we set up these things in advance. So maybe, yeah, maybe we have like people suddenly start speaking of his name. And we slowly begin to uncover flashbacks of the fallen king. And you're like, so what did he do? And then you begin to hear stories of like his conquest or something like that. I don't know. Make stuff up. And eventually, we get to him because he's unleashed. Something like that. This is a really, really good video though. I could talk about these things for hours because this is like big picture stuff. And I am very much a big picture story enjoyer. World building is probably one of my favorite things in fantasy in general. I love it. The only thing that I always think about is how you do world building. And I think Tolkien is the gold standard for a reason, right? Because a lot of these things exist in the Tolkien verse, but you never feel them and you never hear about them, you never touch them, you never know anything about them. They just are. They are written about in the thing that I still can't pronounce, in the similar thingy, right? But like in the Lord of the Rings and in the Hobbit, they don't exist. You don't know of them. They just are. And then you read the lore book and you're just like, oh. That's what I want it to be like. Anyway, a very, very good video by Necrit.